flashback to 1945. I found myself in an armored spearhead of the 14th Armored Division. We were in the Alsace campaign and along the Rhineland. And in April of 1945, the American Army found that it was about to overrun a lot of concentration camps. Now, none of us soldiers knew anything about this at the time.
Yeah, no, I don't think many civilians back here did either. Yeah.
Right, right, but there's a coverage to that which I'll talk on later. The fact that they suddenly found out they needed people that had expertise in the German language, because which was in short supply like hen's teeth.
Yeah.
And my number came up. They didn't have computers in those days, I don't think, but on the Army information on my file, I must have put down I spoke German. And unbeknown to me, we were somewhere near Nuremberg and had just been attacked by some Messerschmitts and Focke-Wulfs when our first sergeant came up with a Jeep, and we were idling alongside the road in various attitudes of defense, and he handed me this order from General Haslip of the headquarters of the 7th Army. And I was bewildered. It didn't state any purpose on this order. And he said, you are to get right in this truck and proceed right back to Army headquarters at Heidelberg, giving me no inclination what this is all about. Well, at that point I thought, hey, wow, I'm in deep doo-doo. What did I do?
What did I do now?
That a general is giving this big order to have me back at headquarters.
With your own truck yet, you know.
Yeah. Oh. So I was sweating out the ride back to Heidelberg, and at that time Germany was in the last throes of defeat.
Yeah.
The scenes were chaotic, thousands of displaced persons fleeing to the rear, fleeing Germans. The roads were clogged with chaos. It was a total madhouse. Dead people were lying all over. And my nerves were pretty shattered at that time after 5 months of armored spearheading. And I was totally bewildered. Well, I had to obey orders, so I got back to Heidelberg, and I looked a mess, riding in the back of a dusty, dirty truck. And I came up to headquarters, and the MPs grabbed me right away. You can't go into headquarters this way. He says, go back to the showers, and they'll give you a clean uniform. You're to report to so-and-so. So I went, took a shower, got back in. I had a report to a major and the Judge Advocate General. I didn't even know what the Judge Advocate General existed.
Yeah.
I'm like, what's this? What's this? Well, it's the legal department of the Army. Oh, then it,
Now you really
I must
did
have
it.
done something, you know. So I walked in, saluted, reported to the major. He says, well, Anton, can you understand and can you speak German? Can you read and write German? I said, yes, sir. Well, he says, I can't believe that 100%. I'll have to give you a test. So he gave me an on-the-spot test. I passed it. And he says, you are now being transferred to the Judge Advocate General's section of the Army. I thought, wow, that's one heck of a lot better than fighting at the front, you know.
Getting shot at.
Nice, easy, rear echelon job, you know. Oh, I thought, boy, this is really it. So he said, you got your quarters, you then report to so-and-so detachment. And the first thing he said, you're going to spend, this was April 10th, you're going to spend a week practicing with a lawyer on investigating rape cases where German women were raped by American servicemen, which was a crime at the time. So this is what we did to develop an expertise of a team. I had a typist, I was an interpreter, and we had usually a captain or a lieutenant that was an officer that was also a former lawyer, that had legal experience. So we did a few cases for a week or so, and lo and behold, April 29th came up, and they knew they were going to take over Dachau Concentration Camp on the afternoon of the 29th of April, 1,300 hours, when the 42nd, I think it was 42nd or the 45th Division entered Dachau, broke into the camp. That's when they set us off. We were given a staff car, a captain. I went with a captain, and no typist at this time, myself. We were told to report the Dachau Concentration Camp near Munich. And off we went with our orders, and we spent the night in Munich, which was in terrible disarray. No comforts, you know. And the next morning, we drove up to Dachau Concentration Camp, and we were stopped by medics. We couldn't get into the camp without taking typhoid and typhus shots, because everybody in the camp was exposed to typhus and typhoid. So as we drove along the tracks going into the camp, we stopped in horror. There were 40 boxcars filled with dead male men that were in various stages of agony and attitudes of death, that had starved to death in the cars.
How many cars was that?
40 of them.
40 boxcars?
Well, they weren't all loaded. There were lots of them in there. I think there were, the count must have been about 1,500, which is fairly staggering. This is nothing compared to what was inside the camp waiting for us. So we took a look at this agony, and I thought, oh my God, hey, this is, this is, makes combat, pales combat, you know. You see a few hundred or a few of your buddies getting killed in combat, but this is thousands. I mean, it's staggering, totally staggering.
It's almost beyond your comprehension.
You can't comprehend it. I went into some sort of a shock to prevent myself from breaking down, because, hey, you can't break down. You're a combat soldier, right? It's probably one of the big mistakes of my life. I didn't even cry. I held this back. And it probably was similar to this post-traumatic stress that the veterans experienced after the war in Vietnam and things like that. It's a notable shock to your psyche. We went into the camp, and the first thing off, we were directed to take a tour of the camp, the captain and I, as witnesses, future witnesses to what happened. Now, we weren't the only investigative personnel there. The CIC from the Army Division that took it over, it was investigating the camp. There were French and English units that came in to investigate the camp. Our OSS, units of the OSS were there from the American government. And we all were assigned to different sections of the investigation. But all of us were taken on a tour of the camp, a visible tour of the camp. We saw the crematoriums, we saw the stacked cordwood bodies in various rooms, and we went through the barn where I don't know how many people were lying in gutters dying that we couldn't even save. I'd say at the point, 300 a day were dying. They couldn't be rescued by the medical people at all. And carloads of dead bodies were being taken out in carts, horse carts, and ready for burial. The United States Army was doing a tremendous job to get this thing together, to try to help the starving inmates to get their stories. It lasted about 2 days, the investigation. This was a perfunctory investigation. It just skimmed the top. I don't know what transpired later, but I was detailed on a section that investigated the gun executions of Russian officers. And the previous experience was they would execute anywhere to 10 to 50 or 100 officers, depending on who they wanted to liquidate, a day. They'd take them out to a stake and tie them and make them kneel down and shoot them in the back of the head. That was a humane way of executing people at Dachau. Some of the others didn't fare as well. Well, the investigation transpired and was documented by the OSS, and they made a book. I don't know how they got a hold of a printing press, but I was fortunate enough to get a copy from them on the Dachau investigation, which is contained in this booklet.
That must be a rare
It is. It's a semi-rare document. I'm sure that there are other copies of this available by some of the servicemen or officers that obtained them. I am donating this particular document to the Milwaukee Jewish group. Before I pass away, I'm giving them most of my stuff. I'll photocopy what I want, and I'm giving them the authentic copies.
Okay, now this is the
Authentic report on Dachau.
with the initial report, or is this
This is the
become
initial
more?
report.
Okay. Yeah.
Now, I don't know what they did after this, but as you can see, I have my picture here and a document which I doubt the cameras will pick up, giving me authorization to, as an interpreter and an assistant investigator, and signed by my detachment officer.
Well, she can shoot that up close afterwards.
All right,
Sure.
fine. Then we won't go into that. A few weeks after that, we had a pool of us personnel that were on the investigation and other war crimes personnel in Augsburg, in an old German garrison, and the American Army started to put together various teams that were being sent out as field investigations of war crimes and atrocities.
Is that in that particular part of
This was
your sector?
in
then?
Bavaria, Augsburg,
Okay.
Bavaria.
Okay.
Now these teams went out to a broad spectrum all over Germany, except the Russian zone we couldn't get in. They didn't go into the English zone, and they didn't go into the French zone without permission. But we did often go into the French zone. I never personally went into the English zone. Our investigations more or less took place from the area from Heidelberg to the Swiss and Austrian border, a corridor going that way south. That was our team's investigative area. And we were given a broad, how would you say, authority by the commanding general of the 7th Army. We had the certificates and empowerment to initiate investigations. We could also arrest and jail war criminals. We went all over a certain area. We would consider, we get our cases from Heidelberg headquarters, and then we were assigned duty to a county area and investigate that for a month, covering all the work in that area. And then we kept on going until we finally arrived at the Swiss border about 9 months later.
Okay.
So the work was very, very interesting and, how would you say, adrenaline high.
Yeah, yeah. Did you get much cooperation, though, or how?
Oh, yes, very much cooperation from the military government units and the United States Army. And we also got cooperation from the new burgermeisters that were put in that weren't from the Nazi regimes.
Okay, yeah.
This was right after the war. So we worked hand in hand with the military government. We worked with the German civilian government that was being replaced and denazified section. And so we were able to, how would I say, they fed us a lot of information on cases that we were working on. This, of course, could not have been possible because we didn't know the country, we didn't know the people that we were looking for. It's similar to playing blind man's buff. I mean, this is a hit and miss thing where if you don't have initial information, you're just stymied.
Yeah, who could it be? I mean, who was there to know unless you could really...
This was a monumental task when you go back in retrospect that every jail and every PW compound was loaded with suspected war criminals. So a lot of
they would infiltrate them...
No, they didn't. They were captured by the Americans.
Oh, okay.
Or they were in jail on charges.
Okay. I thought maybe they slipped into
No, this was after the war.
Okay.
And these people some of them had been apprehended, and some of them were turned in, weren't even guilty of anything by vicious slander by people that hated them, you know.
Yeah. Good even day, yeah.
So a major part of our task was freeing the innocents. I mean, they had everybody locked up from the streetcar conductor to the dog catcher as a war criminal.
Right.
So we had to separate the chaff from the real stuff. And a great deal of my duty was occupied in going to these German jails and PW compounds and making on-the-spot initial investigations and freeing the somewhat deemed innocent victims. Then we also had to put time on actually interrogating more serious offenders and relegating them to another trial at a court. Because under our American system of justice, you just can't do like the Russians did, line them up and machine gun them, and that's the end of the problem. We couldn't do that.
So really they set up a Americanized type of judicial system
yes.
over there then, right?
We were not the court, though. We were the initial investigators.
Right, but when we hear like the Nuremberg trials, that was as
That
close
was-
to coming to
That was the apex of the whole.
innocent until proven
Right.
guilty type
Well,
of thing.
we had the same attitude with these people. We could not torture them. We couldn't hit them. We couldn't use duress. Sometimes it happened. We had cases, isolated cases of resistance. I found out during my investigations, I had to tell the officers and the typists not to carry any sidearms. I became the only one that had a sidearm because there's too much possibility of an enraged victim or a accused war criminal, as happened in the American courts. The person would seize a gun from somebody else,
yeah.
and we would have been liquidated.
Yeah.
So the only one that had a gun in the room was me. And I sort of was the physical enforcer because I had combat experience, and my physical appearance in those days was sort of...
You're a little younger then too, right?
I was really a hunk, you know. A dead shot and knew how to use a gun and all that stuff. But I was very fortunate. I never had to shoot anyone. I used, how would you say, diplomacy more or less. And that was the better route to go. That's another facet we covered on our investigation, was the investigation of the slave labor camps which were built around the concentration camps. Now, a lot of people don't know this.
Yeah, no, that's new to me.
These were the labor battalions that were used to repair our bombing attacks. They were usually near major cities and were rushed or forced marched into the areas that were bombed, and within 24 to 48 hours, most of the bomb damage was corrected, that the German army or the infrastructure of the business
Yeah,
or
that
war
technical
munitions and that
expertise
could be put back into operation. So our strategic bombing really wasn't effective because we constantly kept on trying to knock out different segments, and it didn't work. The
Yeah,
Germans...
knowing we wouldn't bomb around these camps for fear of
Right,
killing
because of the
innocent
people, yeah, right.
so they cluster them in there then, yeah.
We would be bombing Slavs and Russians and French prisoners
Yeah,
and
yeah.
killing our allies.
Yeah, yeah.
So that was another facet of the investigations. And we also investigated, an interesting facet was the euthanasia killings by German doctors in sanitariums.
Yeah.
Now, one day in June, I was sent on an investigation of a big sanitarium right over Heilbronn, Germany, which was in the town of Weinsberg, and was I would say, compared to the Milwaukee County institutions, a little smaller than that, which is
But a good
very
size
big.
one,
You
yeah.
know, it's big. So I went in, and we knocked down the gate, got in, and we went to see the head man, who turned out to be a German medical doctor from the higher echelons. And he was a name of Dr. Hughes, was his name. So I introduced myself and I introduced the captain, that we were war crimes investigators, and we wanted to see the files in his office, and we wanted to take a tour of the institution to look at all the inmates. Well, he started to stammer and blush, turned red. I says, come on, Doc, let's go. We want to see what's here, you know. So he didn't say anything. He took us through the empty halls and beds. I says, where are all these people? And he says, well, they were taken, they were done away with. I said, done away with? Well, you must have had hundreds of patients here, if not thousands during the years.
Yeah, yeah.
I says, let's back to your office, Doc. We're going to look at the files. And he says, well, I can't give you everything now, but he started to explain what happened to these patients. The German government knew that during the war effort, they could not support an invalid society. So the edict went out all over Germany and all of the hospitals and institutions that any of the retarded children, adults, or mental patients, or people with illnesses that were uncurable, all of these people were to be liquidated. Now, they did it in a humane way as possible. They were all given injections.
That's nice of them.
Yeah, right. They were all given injections and a bus ride en route to the local crematorium, where by the time they got there, they were semi-dead. If not, it didn't matter. They went into the crematorium and they were disposed of. And the relatives received a notice, your relative died peacefully of a heart attack. And there was no investigating this. That was what you got, and you didn't make any outcry or anything about it. I suppose some of it leaked out, but it was a way of cutting down on the burden on the German infrastructure.
Mm-hmm, yes.
They didn't have to feed thousands
It sure
and thousands.
minimizes your health care problem.
Yeah,
I mean,
it would have
in regards
taken
to-
care of our Medicare problem.
Yeah,
they
boy,
say
oh,
here.
boy, well, that's...
Yeah,
How
most
many-
of us would be gone.
Yeah. How many people do you think that...
Well, this was just one institution. Now, this was widespread throughout Germany on all the institutions. It was a Nazi edict. So I would say I have not the figures. There must have been thousands of people that were liquidated. Because there wasn't anybody around this hospital that even resembled a patient.
But the files, you were able to get files
We
and
got the files,
documentation?
and I told Dr. Hughes that we're returning the next morning for all the files. And as I came back next morning for the files, Dr. Hughes was dead at his desk. He gave himself one of his own injections. He couldn't face up to the investigation.
The deeds, yeah.
Before that, I had threatened him the day before. I said, I call him Schweinhund in German. I says, what about your Hippocratic oath as a doctor? How could you do this, you know? And there wasn't any talking back in the Nazi system. You either went along with this system or you were liquidated yourself. Well, that was it. It was a horrible, rigid enforcement of their rules. And you got to remember, the Nazi system brought these people up since 1933 to hate Jews, to hate gypsies, to hate. And they went along with this. Even in our investigations, you never found a German that broke down and said, oh yes, this was horrible, I shouldn't have done this, my conscience, I should have been overcome by my conscience, I should have rebelled. They weren't even Nazis. We had a hard time finding any Nazis. Where were all these bedbugs and cockroaches? They were a major part of the population. They went along with this.
They were just regular people who were swept up into the...
They supported Hitler. They weren't all in the Nazi party, but they had... You could say most of the Germans were painted with the brush of Nazism.
Well, I imagine
To what
that,
degree, we can't take the time to go into that.
Yeah.
But it was evident, you know.
Yeah, I guess it's. I guess that's what shows you what.
It's a dismal part of history.
Yes, it really is. What hate will do, and what
is a black mark on the German country and its people. What I don't think the American people really understand or haven't been exposed to is the depth of the Nazi system. At the end of the war, we found out that there were over 120 concentration camps in Germany alone. Now this is mind-boggling.
Yeah, really, 120. That
120.
You know, we hear of Dachau, Auschwitz, and
you only hear about the prominent ones, but they had a lot of small ones all over the place. So, anytime they wanted to dump somebody into the grinder, they didn't have to take them very far.
I guess that does minimize opposition. You know, I imagine
It certainly did. Your enemy's gone.
Yeah.
Effectively silenced, he's dead.
Yeah.
He goes up the chimney or he ends up in a bar of soap.
Yeah.
And what they really did, another bestial thing they did, they had the 4 great annihilation centers in Poland and in Russia, where the Nazi Einsatzgruppen were killing, how would you say, obliterating the Jewish population. There was no mercy for the poor Jews.
Genocide.
Genocide was practiced in all its evil forms. The death toll was staggering. I mean, you can't even imagine this. Any worse of them, up to 1 million people in certain sections were systematically butchered off. 50,000 in some of the cities, Polish cities and Russian enclaves. It was just one horror story after another.
Do you feel that the war truly and all of your work and efforts have really stomped out Nazism, or is...
Oh, definitely not. What happened in 1981, the resurgence of neo-Nazism in the United States became not prevalent, but it started popping up in various areas of the United States. One particularly was Skokie, Illinois.
Yeah, I know Skokie is quite a Jewish neighborhood, if I recall.
Well, they had a Nazi parade there, which really horrified the Jews.
Yeah.
And at that point, the Jews started to realize they're going to have to get some witnesses together that would give some authenticity to the Holocaust. So that's when my magic number came up again, because what I had done during or after the war lay dormant until 1980.
Now you got out of the military, came home,
Right, it all...
regular life,
It was a
raised...
big nothing.
Yeah. Worked hard all your life,
Right,
and all of a sudden...
I exposed my friends to material I had at home, but it was past over.
People were probably glad, you know.
I
and then
didn't want to
after
hear
that-
about it. You know, what happened in 81, I was shopping in Mitchell Street with my wife. We bought some furniture at Kunzelmann, and as I came out of the store, there was a Nazi, dressed in an old Nazi uniform, giving out hate literature on Mitchell Street.
In Milwaukee.
In Milwaukee. Well, I almost dropped in my tracks.
Yeah,
I felt like pummeling him on the spot, but I didn't want to provoke an incident where I probably would have ended up in jail and have killed the guy. So I bit my teeth. I shouldn't have. I should have popped him. Big mistake. I made a big mistake. Usually I'm a guy that reacts, but I had my wife with. I didn't want to expose her to any terror incident, whatever. So I hung back and I said, oh my God, what the hell is happening here, you know?
Yeah, yeah. 1981 in
1981.
Milwaukee, Wisconsin, we've got a Nazi handing out hate literature. That's got to make your day, huh?
I got back and my wife knew of my experiences. She came from Austria. I married a war bride. And she came from an anti-Nazi family where her family was persecuted during the war. And she says, you got to tell your story. You got to tell. I said, who the heck is going to be interested in this? I said, it's all over. It's long gone. But I sure hated to see this idiot strutting around on Mitchell Street. She said, well, she talked to several people at West Bend High School, and it must have got around to the papers.
Mm-hmm.
Because lo and behold, I got a call from the West Bend News, and this wasn't the first interview I had. I had an interview in 81 and in 83, and a gentleman came to the house and took down my story, and I gave him the facts that I had, and it was published in the paper.
Mm-hmm.
And lo and behold, some Jewish groups picked it up, and it went along for a few months, when all of a sudden I got a telegram from Washington, from the State Department. We would appreciate if you would come down and spend some time with us at the ceremonies we're having on the Victory Thing of Europe again in Washington, D.C. And we have a world symposium, and all the liberators, and I was appointed a liberator from my beloved state of Wisconsin. Emotional.
Yeah, yeah. Well, take it easy. It's been a...
I was invited by the State Department. They had a 4-day symposium
In Washington, D.C.?
in Washington, D.C. at the State Department.
And this was
Holy of
sponsored
Holies.
by the...
Sponsored by the State Department and the Memorial Holocaust Council of Washington, D.C.,
Okay.
a Jewish group. And, I mean, this is really something for me. I mean,
Yeah, yeah.
really an honor, you know.
Yeah.
I arrived in Washington. My son, who, by the way, is my oldest son, is in the CIA in Washington, and I stayed at his home. And the next day I went down, and as I walked into the state, you had a security clearance to get into the State Department. This was the Holy of Holies. And I walked in, and I gave my name, and 2 Jewish doctors immediately, doctors of philosophy, escorted me to a room that was like set up like the UN, which I've got pictures of this at home.
Oh, okay.
I mean, this was just the most magnificent thing that I was ever exposed to. I was given my own seat of prominence, and I had earphones that interpreted in 5 different
okay.
languages.
How about that?
And at this gathering were all the ambassadors and generals of the 17 victorious nations of World War II. For me to be included.
Boy, that was really wonderful. That's well, that's got to be a high point on your
It certainly was.
in your time. Sort of a
So I listened to all the various speeches, and they had several presentations. And I spent 4 days with the State Department. I met Elie Wiesel. I talked to him. I met the various Holocaust victims that had survived. They also set up a taping of my testimony, which was, I imagine, in the Holocaust Museum at this point. Then the ceremonies winded down at the end of the 4th day when we were given a candlelight ceremony at the Smithsonian Institute.
Okay.
Which was, I mean, this was really staggering. So I met notables from all over Washington. General Eisenhower's son, I believe, or one of the Roosevelts. I met the hoi polloi of Washington and a lot of Holocaust survivors, a lot of generals. I mean, how can I replay this all? It was so
Yeah, well, it must be
overwhelming.
mind-boggling.
Mind-boggling
Yeah, right.
for a
Something
guy
that
like me, a little guy from West Bend.
all of a sudden you turn around and here you're in one of the greatest cities in the world.
I must thank the Jewish groups for their utmost, how would I say, sensitivity.
Well, they really, yes, they really, I'm
And
sure
thankfulness.
appreciative of what
Yes.
has gone on, because I think they do not want anything to
No.
be forgotten. I mean, a lot of times I hear people say that, man, enough of this Holocaust stuff, but I guess the magnitude of it, I mean, my
So,
God,
and that-
because
that
you know, every
aspect-
person had relatives. Everybody has,
Oh, yes.
you know, I mean,
Yes.
it's not,
Yes. It was
it's
just,
like a chain reaction or a pyramid, you know, the suffering done initially by the people
oh, yes.
has to be impacted
That's what I try
by,
to bring across in my talks, the utter depravity of what the Nazi system did to the Jews and to the various Untermenschens that they wanted to liquidate, the Slavs, the various European groups that didn't kowtow to the Germans or whatever.
well, they must have been in this, quote, Aryan or super race.
Oh.
This must not be just a movie ploy then.
No,
There must be
wasn't.
more to it than meets the eye.
Very
then.
seriously enforced and believed by the people that were in power.
Holy smoke, yeah.
Now, you can't give the Germans a blanket thing that they were all guilty of this.
Oh, no,
That's
no.
nonsense.
No,
It's
that's,
a military machine that had an iron fist.
yeah, somebody got
Yeah.
control that shouldn't
had
have got
absolute
control.
control.
And when your life's in jeopardy,
They even liquidated the Germans.
Yeah.
Any opposition. Many of the notable religious leaders were done away with in Dachau. I mean, you were gone. That's it.
Yeah.
So at that point, I want to reiterate that the important part is my testimony, not myself.
Right. Well, you're,
Testimony is important that the Jews can prove what happened. Irrefutable evidence, not just myself, but by various other detachments and various other countries that documented the atrocities in the concentration camps and the Nazi system.
yeah. That would be a shame, really,
It would
to...
have been a sin for me to remain silent.
Yeah. I can see why they appreciate your coming forth, because it's been, I can see it's been, you know, it's quite, it had to be quite traumatic on your whole life, you know. I mean,
Still is.
Yeah, it still is. I imagine once in a while you can have some flashbacks that you would rather not, yeah.
Ghosts.
Yeah, I bet you. Yeah, that's something that, like I say, it's just as being lost about history, because I don't know if I gave my quote today, but I really think, and it's worth it again, and
Right.
I think to be ignorant of history is to be ignorant, because we don't want to make these same mistakes again.
Right.
I think that is so important. I hate to beat a dead horse, but
yes.
I really think that it's nice to sweep everything under the rug and forget about it, and then have people say, writing new history books denying that it ever happened.
Yes.
And some of these, from what I understand, some of these neo-Nazis are saying that it never happened, that it's all propaganda.
Well, this is why the testimony is important. So we denigrated into a situation where we had 5,000 war criminals to interrogate from a PW cage, and it became a mass production thing of interrogations by various interpreters and assistant investigators, where we had a workload of about 25 to 30 cases a day, and it was boring, tedious, not very rewarding. I mean, you couldn't do nothing to them. You felt like killing some of these guys on the spot, but you couldn't even touch them, you know?
Yeah.
So that went on for several months, and I had enough points accumulated at that time where I began to become depressed. A lot of this stuff was possibly weighing on my psyche at that point, and the constant, it was like a psychiatric thing where you have to, you're listening to constant tales of murder, you know, bad deeds.
Not much happiness.
No happiness there. It ruins your outlook on life, you know.
Yeah, yeah.
So you hated to go in there in the morning because it was a steady diet of the same old baloney every day.
Yeah.
You become depressed. So I said, hey, I got to get out of this. I had enough of it, you know. So I asked one of my officers, I told him I had enough of it, and I opted for, I had enough points to get out of the military. Mm-hmm. I got a letter of commendation from my officers, and I left with good feelings, but I felt at that point I wasn't doing much good anymore in my job. It was winding down, you know.
But
they could have, anybody could have done this.
Yeah, the wear and tear, too, has got to get caught up on you a little bit there.
I opted to go home, and I bugged out of the thing. And like I say, this all lay dormant until 1981. In 1983, I got a communication from the Prime Minister's office from Israel, inviting me to a 6-day celebration in Jerusalem. And I went, and it was another high point of my life. Mm-hmm. I attended 6 days of celebrations on the Warsaw Uprising, and I met people from all over the world, the partisans, the heroes of the whatever. We were all over Jerusalem. Mm-hmm. And I went through Yad Vashem, and I was given a equivalent of the State Medal of Israel, bronze, not the gold. But even that honor is an honor.
Not many people I know that
I
have
don't think so, not around this area anyway.
When you really, I don't remember, I had read once where the total number of people killed were possibly throughout World War II were maybe 20 million, or did I dream that? Maybe
50, so 50 million.
50 million?
That's the entire casualties from both sides.
On both sides on a global basis.
55 million.
Is that what that is? 55 million, and that...
That's just, you can't...
No, you can't.
If you even try to encompass the deaths of 6 million Jews, to me, it makes sense, because I know what dead people are. I had to haul my buddies' dead bodies back from the front, who were killed in action. So when you see your friends killed, and then you go on to seeing, what are all these thousands of bodies lying there? What happened to them?
Yeah.
Why were they killed? They were killed just because they were Jews?
Yeah, yeah. Yeah. But I think we're going to conclude right now. Do you have any final comments you'd like to make about any insight or something, sort of a summation of...
Prayer.
Okay, great.
The victims of the Holocaust are in the silent memory of God.
Mm-hmm. Amen. Well, thank you. It's really been nice to be here with you, Anton. And,
Thank you, Mr. Gates.
It's been a real privilege and a pleasure, and I know you're a credit to the community, and the VFW, and the country in general, and maybe we'll do this again sometime. We'll talk about some of the nights in town, some of the nicer things.
Some of the fun I had.
Right. Okay, thanks a lot.
Thanks, Mr. Gates.
It's been a pleasure.